Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Catalyst. Please take your seats. We will begin the show in 5 minutes. The presentation will begin momentarily. Please join me in welcoming California State Controller Malia Cohen.
Hello? Anybody out there? Are you guys fired up? Oh, you're still heavy from the coffee and the Danishes, huh? That's what it is. I'm excited to be here. Give yourself applause. This is huge. A lot of work and planning has gone into today's Catalyst Forum. So I want you to hold on tight because you are going to be riding the waves, the highs and the lows and the excitement. It is just going to be an incredible next 2 days. So I want to welcome everyone here. And first of all, happy post-Mother's Day. Any mothers here? Yes? I want to highlight mothers because we are creators of life. And we are creating little beings and bringing them into the world, much like the work that we're doing if you're raising money for a fund. You're creating something. So it's so good to be here to kick off this year's Catalyst event. You heard in the bio and in the introduction, my name is Malia Cohen. I'm your state controller. I know, listen, I am not here because I am cute. I earned every ounce of that title, and I am delighted to be here. And I want to thank each and every one of you for showing up, traveling to get here to be with us for what's going to be, what I believe is going to be an important 2-day event for allocators, for entrepreneurs, and more. But most importantly, these next 2 days are going to satisfy all of your desires, particularly those that are seeking the synergy that comes from bringing diverse investments towards a common goal, okay? So the host of this conference, CalPERS and CalSTRS, serve more than 3 million members who are counting on this synergy that I'm talking about, this synergy to deliver their promised benefits. This forum is one way to combine forces to affect change, to highlight the importance of supporting diverse and emerging investment talent and untapped opportunities that they represent. That is why we're here. There are over 100 employees from both CalPERS and CalSTRS. I want you to not be shy. I want you to understand the assignment. You are here to network, to grow. So leave your shy self at the table. And I want you to step in and I want you to be bold. I want you to ask these questions. You find someone who hasn't returned your phone call, you ask them, why haven't you returned my phone call? Now is the time for us to come together and to network. So I want you to feel energized. I want you to be very excited and incredibly optimistic because CalPERS and CalSTRS, they're bringing us together. And let me just say thank you very much to all the men and the women that have made this possible. This is not an easy thing to do. But hold on. Because we have an amazing list of speakers in store for you today over the next 2 days. So there are going to be meaningful opportunities to network, to generate new and exciting business partnerships. But let me set the stage here just to manage expectations on really why we are convening. It is quite an honor to be able to accept the invitation to give the keynote today, but to set the stage and to level set on why we are gathering at this pivotal juncture in our nation's history for our collective shared futures. The reason that we're here today is to address a topic that's, quite frankly, is very near and dear to my heart. Financial equity, or what I would call opportunity for all. I feel like I'm talking to a dead room. Come on, guys. Come on. There we go. But it's no secret that the current landscape is fraught with disruption and uncertainty right now. Are you guys experiencing that and seeing that? Which is why we need to emphasize that now is not the time to retreat and to fall back, but instead it is the time for us to leave bravely forward into the new and uncharted frontier, visibly saying what we need and what we demand, and also without apology saying that we are not taking anything less. We want opportunities for all. So how are we going to go about doing this? There we go. You guys are cutting it together. Coming alive. How are we going to do this? That is the pivotal question, because quite frankly, we've been gathering for 20 years. 2 years under the moniker of Catalyst, but 20 years in total of coming together, bringing opportunities together and trying to find partnerships. Well, we're going to bring a game for the next 2 days. We have all the right people in this room that are going to affect change. All the right people to your right, to your left, and to your front, and to your back. And this is the kind of change that we need to create so that we are creating opportunities for all. We have our team here of allocators who are seeking best-in-class investments. Now, if you have an investment and it's not best-in-class, sit down, because we're not talking to you. But if you have an investment that you think is stellar, then please start talking. Share it with everyone. We've got managers who provide skilled leadership for a variety of asset classes, and the investment consultants and other professionals who help shape the financial landscape, not just here in the state of California, but across the world. Because I'm sure you heard California is now the 4th largest economy in the world. That means something. And so by seeding new and innovative opportunities that could be right here in this room today, it gives me the shivers. I'm so excited about that possibility. Making sure that our teams are diverse, like the people we serve, and by applying the insights, today's agenda offers a few things. Okay? Today's agenda is going to allow us to start with some key facts about just financial equity. Let's just say what it is. And we are going to also be in dialogue and with the level understanding that we are here to create change. We are not here to sit complacently by. Here's some facts for you. Research from NASDAQ found that including more women and more Black Americans in early stages of innovation can boost U.S. GDP by $640 billion. $640 billion. Now remember, I said California was the 4th largest economy in the world. That is by GDP standards. That means that we are 4th to the United States, to the United States, to China, to Japan, and then the humble state of California. So when we base data from PitchBook, only 2% of U.S. venture capital funding was allocated to businesses with all female founders in 2024. And those are just the stats for diverse managers alone. You got to ask yourself, why is that? If we know that adding African American and or adding women increases the bottom line, why are we not doing it? If we are a data-driven business, what is preventing us from doing that? You can answer that after the 2 days. But I want to also talk a little bit about emerging managers who represent new ideas. They represent unique market opportunities and are another class of investors that are lacking access to capital. Why? Another concept to think about, women are expected to collectively inherit around $30 trillion from baby boomer generations within the next 5 years. Thanks, Mom and Dad. and are projected to control 75% of discretionary funding worldwide based on a recent study into consumer behavior. That is very powerful. So, to the men that love us and that trust us women, put us in the game. You are our allies. We need you to step in when we are not in spaces to represent and to advocate on our behalf. Research just recently released by the Milken Institute observed that venture capital firms with female general partners and founders have a higher proportion of deals targeting female-funded and female co-funded companies in the industry. No surprise there. We're women. We like to work with other women. We're comfortable in that circle. So I say all of this to say that women have figured it out. And emerging managers have figured it out. But we've barely scratched the surface of tapping into the investment talent that's out there. And the risk of losing out by not tapping into the talent is a risk that we cannot afford to take. As a board member and a fiduciary of CalPERS and STIRS, it's my responsibility to act on the interest that's in the best interest of our members, right? So, frankly, we owe them a debt of gratitude for their service. We're talking about teachers who are shaping the lives of the next generation of working professionals, the public safety professionals who put their lives on the line, and the legions of state and local public servants who work every day to make California a better place for all of us to thrive in. We owe it to them to expand our horizons and to find the very best investment to ensure that their pension and their health benefits are waiting for them when their service is complete. Now, this is an awesome task. This is why we're here today. That is the agenda. That is the purpose. So let me share with you your own assignment, okay? Today's agenda, it's power-packed with fascinating case studies about people and companies who've overcome the odds. You will feel inspired. You might even shed a tear. But most importantly, I want you to go out there and carve a pathway for others to follow. And if you are one of the few percentage of women that have made it, please look back and lift the women behind you up. Bring them into the space. Bring them to the table. Valuable insights you're going to learn today from the CIO and investment manager of the nation's two largest pension funds, and a deeper dive into the barriers facing women that are vying for capital. Now, I know many of you women in here are like, I already know the barriers, but we're going to articulate them and we're going to keep talking about them until they are so diminished and we squash them. And it's a thing of the past. Thank you. You're going to hear inspirational lessons learned from emerging and diverse managers who have broken through. And, of course, as promised, the networking breaks that will help you make valuable connections while you're here and making the most of your time. So I am very excited to see what the day brings.
Everyone, please find your seats. Funding ventures for female partners will begin in 5 minutes.
The person whom you're trying to reach is currently unavailable.
Everyone, please find your seats. Funding ventures for female partners will begin in 5 minutes. The presentation will begin momentarily. Please welcome back to the stage CalPERS Chief Executive Officer Marcy Frost, as she is joined by CalSTRS Chief Executive Officer Cassandra Licknock and First Partner of California Jennifer Siebel-Newsom.
Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope the networking sessions were productive. Again, I know that's much of the reason why we built out the 30-minute sessions in between the panels is even though we didn't do the speed dating format like we did 2 years ago, you can still do a little speed dating out in the hallway with one another, all professionally, of course. Again, just acknowledging all of the networking that's so important to this event. It's getting to know one another. It's starting to do those informal pitches, getting those next calls set up so that you can make your real formal pitch to some of the allocators in the room. Turns out that the lack of access to professional networks is one symptom of the challenge. We're here to discuss overcoming the barriers to venture funding for female investors and female entrepreneurs. And just want to let you all know that a couple months ago, First Partner, Jennifer Siebel-Newsom and Cassandra Licknock and I had a meeting that was convened by the First Partner to really talk about this topic. And as a part of that conversation, we said, oh, this would be really cool to have at Pathways, that we think it would be interesting to hear from Jennifer. It'd be interesting to hear from Cassandra and how CalSTRS is looking at venture. I certainly have some views on this as well. You heard a few of those views in my first panel. But we're excited to have the conversation. And we'll try to keep this, again, as informal and much of a discussion versus just a set and get type of opportunity. But the data is really startling, and we all will be referring to some of the data that's been collected, not by CalPERS, not by CalSTRS, but by large institutions who do this for a living. And again, the numbers are quite startling. It is a problem that we have to figure out how to overcome. We need to figure out a better way to support our female innovators. And I can't think of a better partner than the First Partner in helping us to figure out how do we really move forward. So here are some of those numbers. So women accounted for only 14% of decision makers in the US venture firms, and that is according to All Raise. Startups with mixed gender founding teams fare slightly better, receiving about 15 to 20% of venture capital funding, but still lag the male-only teams. And the average funding raised by women-led startups compared to male-led startups at the seed stage is 1 million versus 2.1 million. So again, very honored to have the First Partner of California, Jennifer Siebel-Newsom, and my counterpart, the CEO of CalSTRS, Cassandra Licknock. So joining us to explore the funding challenges and how to relate to the broader gender equality issues. So we're just going to jump into this. And again, we're going to try to keep it more discussion and more conversational. Like I said, we've had a little bit of a pre-meeting on this, and it was quite lively. I think we all have a lot of passion about this topic and really want to figure out what are the best practices to make a bit of a difference, obviously, to launch into big differences. So I'm going to ask Jennifer to respond to, so how do you see access to venture capital and ownership more broadly? How is that part of the solution to closing the gap and building intergenerational economic power for women?
Thanks so much, Marcy and Cassandra. It's so great to be here with all of you. So as we know, California is the 4th largest economy in the world. We are a center of global innovation. As we know, women are 50-some% of the population. And when it comes to venture dollars, I have numbers like that were $2.7 billion or $1 million allocated, relatively speaking. Billion. Sorry, where am I? I have empathy. My husband's doing the budget right now, so I'm like, are we talking billion or million? For me, I think what's important to note is that wealth begets wealth. In an economy where we're excluding over half of the population, we're leaving ideas on the table. We're leaving innovation on the table. And we've done things a certain way for so long, and a lot of the industries and institutions are, somewhat broken or faulty. We have a climate crisis. We have a public health crisis. I would argue, if you look at technology in particular, if you had more women having funded or started or been funded in terms of the early days of technology and social media, you would have had a different product that maybe wasn't harming our kids, that maybe wasn't addicting our kids. That's just one example of the downside of not having more parity and more partnership at decision-making tables and when it comes to access to wealth. So I'm a firm believer in partnership and that you want all people, as many kind of diverse perspectives around a table to get to the best decision. And again, in a country where wealth begets wealth, we're just going to continue to perpetuate the status quo of wealth inequality and a climate crisis and a health crisis unless we do some jiggering of who's at the tables of power and who has access to wealth.
Yeah, I think you heard Carla on the previous panel talking about the power of three. Like those three voices, the impact of having three voices who are challenging maybe that status quo or the way the company has been run historically, but how do you get different thinking at the table, different inputs at the table, and inputs that are respected? And I think that secret number, and I've actually read on this myself, is about the power of three voices really challenging the norms of that particular company or the norms of that meeting room.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I ask,
Yeah.
what do you feel when we first came together, you feel like you were doing something differently? Can you talk more about what you've committed to and how you're doing things differently than we've historically done?
Yeah. Do you want to start, Cassandra? Or?
I think that we have really been leaning into trying to create events and networking opportunities to bring a wide variety of individuals together to have access to the institutions that we are managing over CalPERS and CalSTRS collectively, and getting people to talk and be at the table and gain access to some of the conversations, which is some of the problems that we're seeing with women in trying to get capital allocated to their organizations.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's hiring the right leaders in your organization who see this problem very similarly to the way that you do, but also have that conviction around diverse managers in our portfolio. And we just shared the statistic with our board in March, and it's a statistic that on the AUM side, we're still hoping that will increase over time, but 33% of the managers in our private equity book, and this is all being done under Anton Orlik and his team, so I'm really proud of the work that they're doing on the natural underwriting, the natural due diligence, and then I can talk a little bit about the other platform that we have for seeding new managers. But 33% of those managers meet the ownership requirements to be considered diverse under CalPERS's definition. This is all work from really thinking about the private equity strategy, moving it away from these mega buyout funds, which are really problematic, frankly, on the human capital side as well, which is a very strong value and belief that we have at CalPERS, but also moving more into that mid-market space. So we get diversifying assets, but we also get more diversification in the managers where we're providing capital. And we think over time, and we've done a bit of performance attribution on that already, and those 33% of the managers are performing better than the rest of the book. So that says something. We have a fiduciary obligation, and we're happy to go out and talk to people that we fully understand our fiduciary obligation. But what our data is showing and the way that we select the managers where we do the investment, so a lot of underwriting on the manager, not necessarily on the asset, is really paying off for the portfolio. And now these are pretty early checks that have been written, so we'll closely monitor this over time. The other thing that we did a couple years ago is we launched what we call the Mosaic platform, but it's really a seeding platform, and we do that with our partners TBG and Grosvenor. I'm very happy to say 2 weeks ago we announced the funding of a European female fund where over half of the board and half of the employees or the team are female, and it is a climate-related fund. So we get we get this diversifying part of the portfolio, but we also get a climate investment and one that we have a lot of conviction in their strategy. So you have to think about this differently. I think a lot of it is this kind of pattern recognition, just keep repeating the things that you've done, and some of that has been successful. But if venture capital is about funding the best idea, guess what? It isn't only a certain demographic that has the best ideas. And I frankly think that women look at solving problems a bit differently than some of our male counterparts, whether those are traditional roles that we have in the household, whether that is the way that we grew up in the communities where we have. But funding innovation should be the best idea wins, and it shouldn't matter if that's a female-led, if that's a person of color-led company. Let's take all of that out of the equation and find the best opportunities so that we can pay the 2.4 million members the benefits that they've earned throughout their public service career. That's the mission that we have. And so we are doing things a bit differently. I think there are more opportunities to do that as well. But I'm really proud of the team for really tackling this as a problem that we want CalPERS to help solve.
And just a super simple question, do you believe that having diverse managers reduces bias, so there's less unconscious bias potentially? Is that what you're finding?
Unconscious bias, that is hard because everyone has bias. It's just being aware that you have this bias. And so within our team, when we're looking at the diligence processes, it's making sure that we're aware as we're choosing the managers to be funded, that we're aware that we have the right people in those rooms making the decisions. There are people who have different backgrounds who all frankly don't look the same. And I think what we're finding is better manager selection based on the numbers that we're seeing. Again, this is very early, but the numbers that we're seeing are very promising. But unconscious bias is one of the things that if you're not aware and you're not treating it and dealing with it, and remember, venture is supposed to be this innovative space. So if we're so innovative in venture, then unconscious bias training and the ability to understand its negative impacts, that should have been addressed a long time ago.
Yeah, and I think that it really affects who gets the meetings and who's evaluated and considered fundable. Those unconscious bias kind of sets the tone sometimes. So I think that it really impacts the opportunities for women, how risks are evaluated. So, those are some real hard barriers to get through.
And there's more risk when women are evaluated, there's presumed higher risk, right? Where men, there's presumed higher.
Yeah. Or women are considered more risk averse when you might need to be leaning into risk in situations. And so when women walk into the room, they think, well, they're going to be more cautious, and which is, we manage risk. Marcy and I are both managing very large risk, impacted organizations. Right. But we might evaluate risk in a different capacity than what otherwise other people might think that we would, or that men might.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hence the benefit of having everyone around the table.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I do think your point about how are female innovators and female managers looked at during the diligence process versus the male counterparts. I do think, as you indicated, I think it's more of a defensive position. Like, what risks am I going to have to mitigate with having a female-led company versus, again, pattern recognition. I know how males in this space are going to have the opportunity set. And so I do think that we come in it in a negative way, that we have to prove ourselves, and then the opportunity set, there's almost a free lunch given to our male counterparts.
Yeah. So I have a question. Access to capital is one piece of the puzzle.
Right.
But so is access to decision-making power. What do you think it will take to get more women, especially women of color, into leadership roles as investors, fund managers, and board members?
So I think the informal and formal networks are critical, and acknowledging that you have to go out of your immediate network to invite the women in and make sure that they're culturally comfortable, because in doing so, you're going to get amazing things on the other side. Let's not forget that women are 85% of consumers, so we make all of those household consumption decisions. So we actually know what works or what's needed at home when it comes to raising our families, when it comes to our communities, and we often have a long-term, more sustainable mindset. So if you invest as a mentor or you sponsor a up-and-coming woman, female leader, the upside, I think, is tremendous, but there has to be that commitment to also looking around being like, everyone in this room looks like me and is the same gender as me and went to the same Ivy League school and played the same sports as me, and that's not, has the same ideology as me. Like, that's not gonna necessarily provide, well, it's definitely gonna preserve the status quo, and it's not gonna move our state and our nation forward. And so I just think the opportunities to mentor and sponsor women are critical. Our nonprofit, the California Partners Project, came up with a board diversity and a board culture playbook, and those tools could be utilized in this realm as well, because it really is about thinking outside of the box and being more creative and more intentional in who you're bringing into the room, and the culture that either enables that person to thrive and then attract even more diverse minds, or that basically prevents them from being able to continue in that community and in that culture. And I don't think I think the transparency piece is also super critical. So our board or our venture diversity legislation, I think, is really important, because transparency-wise, once we come to understand what the makeup is in terms of the funding, I think you're going to start to kind of go, oh, well, I knew that, but I didn't really pay attention to the fact that I'm continue to fund the same exact people. So once again, I think just transparency in and of itself will move the needle, much like it did with our board diversity legislation, SB 826, where we moved in 2018. We had 15.5% or 15.5% female representation on public company boards. And today we have 30% representation, female representation. In that same time period, we went from having 29% all-male boards to, at one point we had 1% all-male boards. We now have 3% all-male boards because the courts challenged the law. But the fact is, we moved the needle far enough. The proof was in the pudding that there's a benefit to having more diverse board representation. And I believe the same thing can happen here.
Yeah, I remember our conversation where you have a lot of friends who are trying to get funded for innovation. And when you think about the types of problems that female innovators are trying to solve, again, they can be quite different. And
Yes.
so I know you shared some of those stories. I think this group might be interested in hearing some of the stories that you're hearing about the challenges just trying to get funded. And then, we talk internally on this topic, and we laugh a little bit for some people who might be premenopausal or menopausal.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, where's the innovation going to come to provide some relief there? It's probably not going to come from, the demographic that's been working in venture for a long time.
Right.
But How do you get funded for this? And also, because we come at it in more of this defensive, trying to prove ourselves, sometimes we give up too many rights, right? Too much rights when we get seated or when we go for that Series A. We're giving up too many of the rights where we lose ownership of the company. So how do we solve that? And making sure that these founding females, like a Jessica Alba, these founding females retain the ownership of their company, retain really what made it special to begin with. But we need women solving problems and getting funded for that as well. But I know you had a lot of conversations with people here in California trying to be funded.
Yes. I know it's not an easy landscape or culture for female founders, as we know, and women entrepreneurs, female founders are often pigeonholed and obviously provide, I had one story I'll share is a friend just being super disappointed, I'm gonna be so vague here, about, asking for literally, just a couple $1 million to start her company, and a male friend going on a walk with his other male friend in venture capital and getting a check the next day for $400 million. And just and then the company not performing very well. And her, continued attempts to just ask for, just crumbs on the dollar. And then again, because of whether it's risk aversion or just a mindset, a scarcity mindset, that then being careful with cash flow, she then was able to actually, 2, 3, 10x the value of her company by being super intentional and strategic, but again, not being recognized and not having that same cash flow. You've heard these stories, it's nothing new. So where I come from is, I think of women as the backbone of their families and the backbone of their communities. And when we have female founders, they're often trying to solve a problem that they faced as a mother or as a community member. And these again they're not always in it for just the money thing. They're looking to actually solve a problem. And they're not gonna lie to you. They oftentimes are addressing climate resilience, healthcare, and education needs that they see as not being addressed in our society. And so when I think about the benefit to all of us from funding more female founders and giving them larger capital, I know that ultimately will snowball into larger benefits for our communities, for our state, and for our country. And given the fact, too, that we live in a society where the majority of households are single parent or dual income households, if we exclude that 51% of the population from accruing wealth, we're only harming the country's future. So to me, it's a no-brainer. And I resist, as a working mom of 4, who was raised by a mom who did stay at home and raise us. And I'm a firm believer in being a parent and a worker. And I think you can have both. I mean, we do have a childcare crisis in this country, but I'm more committed to supporting women into leadership and into the entrepreneurial space and supporting them, because again, I think we've hit a tipping point of sorts in our country where if we don't do something dramatic in terms of representation and leadership and values-based leadership, we are headed in the wrong direction as a country. And so I don't think we have the right even, or it would be smart of us to just continue to go backwards and encourage women to go back to the kitchen. And I'm referencing some cultural stuff that's going on right now.
Yeah.
I think we have to do the opposite of educating young women in the STEM and STEAM fields and really ensuring that all young women are supported and encouraged in pipelines to leadership with clear financial literacy and encouraging the kind of makers model and risk-taking and innovation. Just as I encourage more of us to encourage more young men into the education and care realm and industry, and not to feel like their only role or purpose in life is to be a breadwinner or to make a lot of money. Because I think when we start to have a little more balance, both in the care and education professions and in the money-making industries, we're going to see and realize a healthier country.
Yeah, that's one of the passions that I have, I think, in leading. In leading CalSTRS is the importance and recognition that you can have a balance of being a caregiver and a successful business person, whether it be working for a large institution or starting your own business, and really trying to find that balance. It really, really is important that I speak to staff about staying in the game, particularly when they have to take time off to raise a family. There's nothing, there is a disservice if their voice isn't going to continue to be heard if they're not continuing to participate in the game. So really like those comments.
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah. So given California's leadership in both policy and public capital, and I just want to give some credit to my CalPERS board, because they are very courageous and stick to their values and like to help shape public policy, especially as it relates to finding the best ways to invest the very large portfolio that we're all responsible for. But how do we ensure that our investment strategies align with the broader equity goals that you've championed as first partner, particularly again around women? But I don't think it just has to be women's wealth building. It's, most people in this room are, looking for funding to start doing wealth building because they've been so underrepresented for, way too long. But what do you see those opportunities being?
Well, we have to be intentional, right? And I'm very disappointed in Prop 209. I think it's a disservice to all of us that we feel like we can't give people a leg up when doors and access and opportunity have not been available to certain communities for so long. So I say that. Look, you all are doing a great job. You're ahead nationally, right? You have 33% diverse managers, or 31%?
Just in the private equity book.
But that's still that was intentional. Mm-hmm. That is inspiring to me. And I think that we have to really commit. I don't think, and as California goes, so can go the country. I think that's ultimately, we have I have to pinch myself that we're the fourth largest economy in the world. There's so much possibility that comes from leveraging this asset of wealth accumulation and global and innovation here in this state. And so, again, we have to be intentional and we have to be inclusive. And I think some of our legislation, like the board diversity legislation, but also the venture capital disclosure legislation, I think that's going to move the needle forward. And then we also have to acknowledge the great wealth transfer and make sure that we are supporting women in that realm and making sure that they have access to essentially invest their values and that they're not excluded from those decision-making tables. What about you? What do you think?
On
what
the wealth
more
transfer?
Do we have to do?
Yeah, the wealth transfer is going to happen over the next two decades, and Gen X, millennials will be the recipients of that. But also, frankly, I think the charitable organizations, the 501c3s, baby boomers tended to be more protective, right? Mm-hmm. But I think if you look at the millennials and what they stand for and their values being extremely important, and they put their money where their values are, I think you can see that the world will change over time. But that's 2 decades. That's a very long time horizon, but we should start to see some of that happening a little earlier with the Gen X group. So, more interested in climate investing, more interested in being responsible on, the resources that we have on this planet. I think, maybe the baby boomers are not as interested in that based on, time horizon. However, you would think that if they have grandchildren, they should be thinking about the world that they're leaving behind for them. So I think there will be more investment in the things that we hold value in. Again, diversifying of the capital, more access to capital. But again, we're talking about 2% of the population that will be doing the wealth transfer.
Right.
So we'll see how meaningful that is over time.
Yeah, and I think that it's going to hopefully open up some opportunities for women in investing, or give more access to, individuals trying to advance their business models that are women-led. So I think that there will be some opportunities. Hopefully it's not going to take the length of time that we anticipate. It would be great to see it speed up, and that's where some of the things that we can do is try to engage with our investment partners and talk to them about the diversity of women on their boards and the makeup of their organizations and how that impacts, and really speak to the value that brings to the businesses, because we know that the diversity of board, the makeup of the composition of the board and the makeup of the organization and what women brings to the table really adds value. Mm-hmm. We look at it as a value proposition. Yeah. So it's just basically the facts, and we can see that in how they deliver results.
Yeah.
But how do do you think that the legislation that we have is enough? Like, what would you do, and what would you advise us on at the state in terms of moving the representation percentage of women in venture capital decision-making positions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's not one single approach that's going to solve a very complicated issue that's built up over a very long period of time. So I think the policy environment is, sticking true to those values and those beliefs. And even if you've got a Supreme Court that may not be as supportive, that's not going to be that way forever. So I think it's still churning through the policies that would be necessary. And then I think there are obligations for institutional investors like CalPERS, and I won't obligate CalSTRS, but I think there are, we vote proxies with our public companies, and we should be very clear around what we expect in terms of diversification on their boards, which we are, by the way. We have voted against a number of boards of directors because there isn't sufficient diversity on that board, including females, not just including females, but that's something that I think you have to do. We stand up for the things that we believe in. We believe in strong governance. We believe in diversifying assets. We believe in diversifying these public companies. Those public companies will be sustainable for longer periods of time if they're more representative of the consumers who they're serving. And that's how we look at it at CalPERS, is that we want the diversity at CalPERS to be reflective of the diversity that we have at our membership, our 2.4 million members, as well as here in the state of California. So I think you have to have people who are willing, and particularly at the time and the moment that we're in now, to continue. Unfortunately, it takes a little bit of courage, but we can all do it. But stand up for the values, stand up for the things that will make your fund more resilient, make your employees and your team members really want to work at CalPERS. You want to be that employer where people say, yeah, that organization is representative of the values that I have, and I want to work for that organization. And so we look at all facets, but I think the policy environment continuing to be strong there, and then institutional investors like a CalPERS or CalSTRS with single boards. Like, we're not an asset manager, we're an asset owner. So asset managers have all of these people, all these clients they have to please. We do not have that. We have a board who's fully aligned with the values that we stand for.
Do you feel alone in this era, in the Trump era? And I'm not trying to be political, forgive me, but I think it's important to understand, because so many people are retreating, and maybe feeling a little more timid about standing up and speaking their values. How is that impacting institutional investors?
Yeah, I think we do feel a bit alone, just to be really frank about it. We've gone to some events where the attack or the executive orders on diversity, equity, inclusion are being fully discussed. And I think in the surveys, and I can't attribute this, but I can't say where Stephen Gilmore was, but he brought back some surveys that were done in this meeting. And for the most part, on diversity, equity, and inclusion, people are just not talking about it as much, or unfortunately renaming the way their programs have been performing. And I think what you run the risk of, and I think we'll see this over time, is that's not going to play well to the employees who work in that organization. They're going to see it as a step back. And so retention, I think, is going to be a problem for some of these big companies who had very strong targets and goals that were reasonable, by the way, had now either renamed it or stepped back and said, oh, we're talking about this internally. We're just a little more quiet about this. Now's not the time to be quiet. We're not quiet at CalPERS, right, board? But again, it has to be for the values that you hold near and dear, and those values meet the full fiduciary duty of being able to pay those benefits. And we see, again, diversifying the capital. We see being inclusive. We see hiring, procuring, having health equity in our health program. Some of you may not know, but we're the second largest health purchaser besides the federal government also. And so we see these two things really interacting with one another. But I think you got to stand up for what you believe in. Because if you don't, who will?
Exactly.
Yeah.
These principles are either really...
Yes.
Yeah. Those principles are either part of your real core value orientation or they're not. It's not a box to check. It's part of the culture of the organization, and that's how we embrace it at CalSTRS as well. We are so focused on and making sure that individuals that come into the organization, that they contribute all that they have, bring their true selves to the organization, and do their best work. And cast a wide net for inclusion of everybody that could have the opportunity to come into the organization, because then eventually you will have a diverse makeup of the organization, because it takes a diverse organization to really create value and deliver the results that you need. So you really have to look at, is it part of your value system or isn't it? So, yeah.
Can I ask, is there anything more that female investors or entrepreneurs can do to gain access to informal networks and mentorship opportunities that are working that you know of, that you're championing?
Yeah, I mentioned it on the earlier panel, but I keep coming back to it because it was so startling. But during the pandemic, which doesn't seem that long ago, but seemed like it lasted forever, I was often the only female in those rooms, and those were decision-making rooms in a critical time around the globe. It wasn't just a U.S. Pandemic, it was a global pandemic, and people were trying to figure out how to position their portfolios, how to manage their risk differently, how were we going to return people to the office, which we won't go into because that was really fun. But I think, noticing that is just having the ability to convene the right group. So we started Pathways, which you were our inaugural keynote, so thank you for that. But we started Pathways as a mechanism to start this informal mentoring, that women, more often than not, we second guess ourselves more than our male counterparts. I think we had a panel on imposter syndrome, but what it really means is that sometimes we think that we're feeling this way and it's only us. So I'm the only one feeling like I can't move forward in this way. But in the Pathways room, I think what's reassuring to the attendees is everyone feels that way. And as long as you're willing to be a little bit vulnerable and talk through it, it creates this cohort and this support network that people feel confident about sharing their innovative ideas, that sometimes it makes them feel a little vulnerable putting that out there, but you get them in a room that they feel is safe. It's women who feel the same way that they do. So I think more opportunities to put like-minded women into a room to really discuss whether it's getting funded, how do you make your pitch, how do I have the confidence to actually get that meeting set up, how do I approach Anton out in this break that we have to maybe get that phone call set up for a later date. But I think we all have an obligation to find ways that we can do that. And then what I'm really proud of at CalPERS is that we've always done this. Right? So when we found that there were significant governance issues in public companies, we helped to create the Council of Institutional Investors. When we found that climate investing and the fact that sustainable investing, that you can invest in the energy transition, and how do we integrate those decisions into our portfolio, we did a Sustainable Investing 2030 plan But we also were the co-founders of Climate Action 100. So I think there have to be more people who really like to solve those problems and get people like you and get people like Cassandra into a room and figure out where the best ideas are. But it's not okay to say, oh, this is just a problem, but not be willing to put resources and your voice behind making
And
a change.
it's as women rise up to bend down and help bring other women up with them, that's really important. And I think that as women get into these higher positions or relationships, investing relationships, to expand those opportunities, to support women, to help them lean into their fear, to take those risks, to be brave and to lead. So
this is super random, but is there a connection between those of us who grew up playing sports and Title IX and being team athletes to like a new kind of wave of women in leadership that are more partner-oriented, that aren't so afraid, right? I'm just curious. I think, is there something there?
about being on teams?
Yeah,
I'm
having
sorry.
been socialized to play sports, so that takes risk and courage
Yeah.
and work ethic and drive and confidence and all that, but also learning to be team players and therefore, like, sorry, I'm
No,
in my
no, you're-
filmmaking
yeah,
mode, but
yeah.
I just think there's something interesting about, I'm sort of tired of people saying, oh, women aren't gonna reach a hand out and
Yeah.
uplift other women. I only work with and know women who pull up other women. It's a no-brainer. We do that. It's part of.
I never thought about it until you
Yeah.
said that, but I think that you might have something there. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that just looking back at my own experience in being, a youth athlete and coaching and all of those things, I absolutely loved seeing others succeed. That was where I got my joy, and that's still where I get my joy. That's why I love, working in the position that I have right now, is just to see other people so successful. Everybody's so talented, and they have so much more to offer. I'm just thrilled that I get to participate with it.
So cool. I love that.
But I do think there is a history of women not being supportive
Yeah.
of women. There's a long history of that. And I think that is
And that's because they were the only one in the room, though, right?
the one seat at the table.
Yeah.
So everyone, all the women were competing for that one seat at the
Yeah.
table. And so as we see the seats open up, more board seats being available,
Yeah.
more seats at the decision-making table, I think that competitive spirit comes down a little bit, and then we're competing about the right things. But I'll tell you, and I don't think Power 100 will care if I say this, but I'm like, oh, it's about time. So they have a nomination process. So Power 100 in their second year is just a phenomenal event. If you haven't been there, you should sign up for it next year. But they take in nominations from the community. So 95% of the nominations were done by females, and 80% of the nominations were for females. And so that's a great statistic that I haven't really seen anywhere else, frankly. But I think if women could act more like we're on the team together,
Yeah.
we have our own skill sets, and they're very complementary to one another. We don't have to compete for that single position. I think we're still kind of in the that pit of despair part of the hero's journey on that. But I'm optimistic, but I think we have a long way to go.
And I mean, there's also the partnership piece, the male-female partnership piece in venture capital. What is it, 21% or 27% of venture dollars have gone to co-partnerships, right? And
Yeah, I
those
think
have
so.
been
Yeah.
extremely successful.
they
The
have.
returns
Yeah.
have been even more successful than all male funds or all
Yeah.
female funds, right? So there's something, it's just the partnership piece, once again.
Well, it's
Like-
the diversity of just that composition, because
Exactly.
they're coming from different angles or different
Yeah.
perspectives. So that
Yeah.
just shows that diversity creates a lot of value.
It's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What else do we need to talk about?
I'm
like-
We've got 18 minutes to fill.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah. Does anyone have a question that you would like the first partner to respond to, or anyone? We could talk about ways to overcome unconscious bias. I think this is something that should be familiar to everyone, but you have to hire differently, you have to promote differently, you have to put people who do not look like you in decision-making roles. You have to think about the boards, how you vote your proxy during proxy season on the public companies through their annual meetings. Initiate the training if you haven't done it. We've done it at CalPERS. Make sure that when you're reviewing job applicants or contractors or health plans for that matter, that you have the right team evaluating the credentials of that company, who think about credentials differently and what you value. I really appreciate, I know Stephen Gilmore is here, but even CalPERS has had kind of this historic way in which we fill our positions. You had to come from certain schools. I'm talking mainly about the investment office. You had to come from certain schools. You had to come from certain asset managers to really be, considered for hire in our office. And, enter Stephen Gilmore, and he's like, well, why? Why do we have to do it that way? He's like, I just hired my best investor, and she was a music major. And so I think just thinking about your own bias, all the norms that have been built into these institutions, and just, be that challenging force in a way that people can really hear you.
Mm-hmm. Trust is really important, and relationship and transparency, right?
Yeah.
Which is why it's important for women to have access to the networks and build those relationships in person, just like their counterparts have had the opportunity to, because those relationships are the ones that are going to advance them into the opportunities, I think.
One of the things that some of my female peers have struggled with, and I struggle with it now because I don't have childcare right now, but it's that piece around evening events and networking events in the evening.
Yeah.
And it's like, if there can be more dialogue and transparency around, can this be, my husband loves lunch meetings. He just said to me, Jen, I will go, rather than dinner with other people, can we just have lunch meetings?
Yeah.
Meaning, can we do more of that, so that because we all have lives outside of work. Not everybody has children, but people have lives outside of work that are healthy and important and critical for you to take care of your physical and mental well-being, right? Or you may be caring for an elderly family member. So I think even recognizing the load that women carry, but again, my husband will say it over and over again, work with, he loves like working with people that have other things going on because they're super aware and super efficient and super strategic, because you have to be, because you're holding too much. And we know that working moms hold a lot. So creating places and spaces where women can connect that don't require them to be away from their families. But, I think that's important, like noting when, wow, this woman's really talented. She keeps not showing up for drinks. Well, there's a reason. Yeah. Let's find another way to, bring her in.
And that recognition is super important, because those out of work, outside of the work activities really is a burden on families. I have a daughter who has 3 children.
Yes.
Her husband's a firefighter, so she's a single parent half the time. And I see that struggle all the time, because there's a lot of networking opportunities that she could attend, but she has the responsibility of caregiving. But she's a super successful career-oriented individual as well. Yeah. And I think just the recognition of that, so I really appreciate your comment on that, because that really is impactful to those who have had to have that dual role in their lives.
Yeah. Remember the days where you had the meetings on the golf course? I remember I don't golf,
exactly.
Or the meeting would continue. These are real stories. I've been doing this for a while. Or the meeting would continue in the men's restroom, and I had a female boss who just followed the men into the men's restroom so she could be a part of the meeting. But thankfully, some of that has moved on.
That's awesome.
That's brave.
She had a lot of courage. Her name was Lucille. You've got to give a shout out to the people who helped shape you. But her name was Lucille Christensen. But she was a force.
She sounds like
she was a real
force.
force.
Good for her.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, just the creation of the events really you need to be considerate of. So I think that when women get to be in a place of helping create those types of opportunities, are not going to be male-oriented solely. I mean, it's an opportunity for all. It's not exclusive to just women, but it's inclusive of everybody, not exclusive of women.
Yeah.
Right.
I think we could actually take a question. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you, Simone.
Thank you so much for this panel. It's been really great. And Lori McKenzie, I'm so glad to be with you today. And we've been talking about shifts in investment. And one of the shifts of investment is that the federal government in the past invested for public good. Things like the Forest Service. There's a huge Women's Health Initiative grant that was canceled. Mm-hmm. So the largest longitudinal study on the effects of things like calcium and vitamin D on women's health and so that's all those public good initiatives are disappearing. I'm wondering if there are ways you could share that the government and industry could work together to identify ways to fill these gaps that we need to be funded for the well-being of people, and yet we're seeing a lot of the national funding go away, and I'm just curious if there are any ideas you have around that.
I mean, we're doing a lot of public-private, hi, it's so good to see you. We're doing a lot of public-private partnerships at the state level, and I think, again, we need to be more intentional. Like, we talked about doing a demo day recently where we brought in funders and founders focused on climate resilience, education, and healthcare. 3 areas that female founders are super focused on. And I think that could be something that's interesting, for example. Like, I know that aligns with your values. I just think partnership is the only way forward. And again, I lean on the fact that we have so much wealth in California and so much interest in our innovation economy that we probably need to do more of this with continued intentionality around these are public goods or these are areas that the government doesn't have the resources fully to invest in or hasn't invested enough in, and more of that signaling, which I feel like the governor does and is doing, especially recently with, his, not recently, but throughout. I mean, there's a noise issue, right? Not everybody here, he's like, I don't know how many times I have to say what we're doing or what we're trying to do, and I don't know how to break through. So that is an issue right now. Government could be better at communicating, but we probably got to get a little more creative around that. But I know we're trying to signal and to really put our values out there, given limited resources and hard decisions that have to be made around priorities at the state level. But I 100% think we need to partner more. And I mean, it's one of the reasons everything I do, whether part of the California for All Kids initiative was focused on children's mental health or children's food through our Farm to School program, we pull in a lot of outside funding in partnership with government funding. And of course, most of our partners are in the nonprofit arena, but there are opportunities in the for-profit arena that I hope you're paying attention to, because again, our family values, or our, initially we were calling it the parents' agenda in California, those values are very much about the long-term sustainability of California and our citizens' health and well-being. So again, I coined the term first partner, not first lady, because I wanted to signal partnership, and because I know that partnership is essential, and even more essential if you're going to transform systems and culture as we know it.
I think we could do one more question. Yep, back here. And we did talk about partnerships as a part of this follow-up to the meeting that you convened, and it's about getting the right people, the people who have the current power right now, getting them to understand that they have a role in solving this into the future. And we came, I'm not going to say the names here, but we talked about some really important names, and I think that will be a follow-up that we'll do over the next few months. But.
Thank you very much. My name is Eric Osiakwan from Chanzo Capital, Ghana. So on the issue of diversification, I just want to get your views, probably all 3 of you, on sort of looking at emerging regions like Africa in terms of making high returns and also impact. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question. Part of it is the sync is off, and I'm watching your lips, and I can't see very well anymore either. I apologize.
Right. So Eric Osiakwan from Chanzo Capital, Ghana. My question was on diversification, looking at emerging regions as destinations where you can have higher returns and also make impact, and specifically Africa, if that's on your radar. And also, I'd like to get a views of CalPERS and CalSTRS on that. Thank you.
I didn't catch it. The mic is very warbly. think that's the term for it. Did you? Emerging managers? Oh, emerging regions, thank you. It's very warbly up here.
Yes.
Emerging regions in California or emerging regions?
Around the world, globally.
Africa specifically. Yes, that would be a more what we'd consider a frontier market, but I do know we have relationships with our private equity managers who have companies operating out of Africa, whether that's telecom. Actually, a manager used to have a rose growing business there. But doing something directly, I don't necessarily think that we have anything in the pipeline for that, but we are always interested in managers who think about, again, not just diversifying the capital, but diversifying the geographies by which we invest. The U.S., what the short-term outlook versus the long-term outlook on the U.S., some, say, yay, let's move forward, valuations are down, let's buy. Others are saying, well, let's diversify outside of the U.S. for a while. We also have a strategy in our emerging market debt and fixed income. So there could be some things that we're doing there. But I think at this point in time, when we're trying to build to a 6.8% return over 20 years, we look at every geography and every opportunity is on the table for us to go through that due diligence. But I do know we have managers operating in Africa, and obviously I'll get your name and I can get a little more information to follow up with you. Cassandra, do you have anything else?
I think that just all of the investment opportunities that were presented and emerging markets as well are all looked at through a fiduciary lens from our investment staff. I mean, that really is what drives our responsibility, is in delivering the benefits to our retirees, which 72% of our retirees are female, and this is their only retirement, and that is the bottom line goal of what we have to achieve. So, looking with everything in perspective, that's what our goal is.
Yeah.
Is there one last question?
Yeah, one more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Or two.
That was fast. Do you see her, Simone, right up here?
Can you hear me with
Yes.
the microphone?
I think so.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Jenny Barba from Features Capital, early stage medtech. And there are many people in the room who are part of diverse emerging manager fund of funds and fund of fund accelerator programs. I would love to get your leadership and discussions that you've had with the board and maybe other people in your shoes as to how best allocate into diverse emerging manager fund of funds. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mentioned that we launched a platform basically 2 years ago at the Catalyst event. We put $1 billion. And I think people thought that might be a fund of funds. It's not really a fund of funds. It's a seeding through TBG and through Grosvenor. So seeding and equity stakes. And so fund of funds, we've had a bit of history, and what it boils down to, without all of the long talk on that history, is that you have to be able to choose your managers very wisely. We are not resourced, we don't have the skill set to go down and work directly with the companies, and so we are operating in some ways at a fund of funds. But I think the difficult part in a fund of funds strategy is just making sure that we have the terms right? Making sure that that extra layer of fees that can sit on top, that it is profitable for the manager, but also helps CalPERS to get to that 6.8% return. And those opportunities, are sometimes more difficult to find, and so we typically do that through our high conviction managers. But we're always open. We're listening. We don't know everything. We may not have the terms right. We may not be scouting in the right areas. And again, that's one of the reasons that this event is so important, not just to the people who attend it, but Malia Cohen said it this morning. Between CalPERS and CalSTRS, we have over 100 of our team here. And so you can look at it as kind of hunting and gathering if you want. So Please take advantage of that. If you see someone wearing a CalPERS badge, please take advantage of that. Again, we don't know everything. There might be things that we're missing, and we'd love to hear it.
Last one, over here.
Hi, good afternoon. S.C. Moadi from Mighty Capital. I want to acknowledge the three women on that stage and just the power that's here. It's so inspiring to hear you talk about what you've accomplished and the partnerships you want to build. So my question is, what advice do you have for all of us who, want to have an allocation from one of you, want to be noticed by you? How do we get noticed, and how do we make sure that we continue to be on your radar?
Do you want to start?
I would say just continue to participate in the events that are presented to you and introduce yourselves to our investment managers or staff to talk about what your firm is interested in partnering on. Continue to network and build relationships. I think that's really, really important, and just keep, leaning into those opportunities and making those connections.
Mm-hmm. And I think, again, what you'll see from us, and I'm sure Cassandra and leading her team is the same way, is trying to make ourselves more accessible. I know we had a panel here a couple of years ago that was really about, well, how do you make the right pitch? Like the pitch, like how do you really sell who you are, what you stand for, what your differentiation might be in the market? Really getting that down, maybe an elevator speech is too short, but in these networking events, it's probably an elevator speech that captures the attention. So practice and really hone in on that. And then, I had a lot of sponsors and allies as I was going throughout my career, and sometimes it was more important what they said about me than it was what I was saying in an interview. So find those sponsors and those people who might already have existing relationships with the CalPERS and CalSTRS, and get them to help you in a sponsorship role, not an ownership role, but in a sponsorship, that they have conviction in what you're trying to accomplish. But our commitment is to be as accessible as we possibly can. Again, I have 100 people here who are here to interact with all of you. And our commitment, we have to stand behind this commitment that we have, and it's real.
And I would just offer from a perspective as a woman who's been in different seats, that I think sometimes we women have been socialized to be polite and to accept no or silence or rejection or something as rejection when it's really not. And I've had a couple men in my life who are incredible fundraisers, so slightly different, but who ran mega global nonprofits. And their persistence and their use of humor and their just their ability to lean into their value proposition and why whatever it is that they're doing is invaluable, and why you need to partner. And they're just persistence. And again, we're all so busy. We all get way too many texts and emails every day. So know that sometimes someone's just busy, or they had a personal crisis, or they're on vacation, or they have to focus and hone in on this one deal, but they'll come back around, just not giving up. And again, not thinking that you're impolite, but I think we can learn. That's why I love the partnership of, like, if you're a founder or if you're a venture capitalist, having someone from the opposite sex be your partner. I think there's something you can learn from each other. So the more you can be in rooms where, with diversity and diverse perspectives, and where you can really be curious and learn their style of whether it's raising capital or selling companies, I think there's a real opportunity there. And I just really encourage. I think we do a disservice to young women and girls by not teaching them a little bit more to be rough and tumble. And again, and I think similarly, I look at my 13-year-old son, and He is so confident. And so, and it's beautiful. And I wish my daughters had that same sort of socialization. So again, I think the more you can practice it yourself, it's not always comfortable, but again, not being afraid to ask and reach out in different ways. Again, not stalking anyone. But again, you're not going to. You have a great product. That's ultimately what I think we women need to lead into.
Yeah. And for, Collins calls it the flywheel, but for that actually to work without us having to shove it all the time is that we have to have better representation in the capital space so that it isn't lifting someone up, it's just hearing and listening. I was just at another event in the Tide event. I know Grace Reyes is here. And it's just talking about how do you widen that funnel at the very top of your decision-making process. It's not about giving preference to people, but it's about giving opportunity and equal access. And so we need to think about that a little more deeply than we have as well. But what you want to see is that flywheel working where we don't have to push it and shove it quite so much.
You deserve to be in every room.
Yes.
You have to remind women of that, but you do. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we made it. So thank you. So thank you to the first partner. Thank you to Cassandra, my counterpart just across the river. So we now have another opportunity for some networking. So practice your pitches and enjoy it. And then we will have one final session of the day. So watch or listen for the room announcements about when to convene again. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, have fun. Good luck.
Everyone, please take your seats. The opportunities AI brings to diversity will begin in 5 minutes. Please remain seated. We will begin momentarily. For our final session, please welcome Franklin Templeton Chief Diversity Officer, Regina Curry.
Well, welcome everyone. Well, as the financial industry, and as we've been having this discussion earlier today, continues to evolve, diversity, equity, inclusion has emerged and continues to emerge, I think, as a cornerstone of innovation, competitive advantage, and today's conversation about how AI, when designed and deployed intentionally, and how we're going to talk about today with ethics in mind, can support inclusive business, strategies, and help investment firms reach new markets, mitigate risk, as well as unlock long-term value. We'll explore what that means for us in terms of how can AI expand access, challenge bias, and align with strategic priorities that can benefit both not only the companies that we all work in, but also the communities that we serve. And with those strategic priorities, we also think about the global and the socioeconomic, the cultural and the political moment and the impact on D&I today. We also understand that our increasing reliance on AI, the acceptance that we all have today, is even more important that we have this conversation. So I am really excited to turn to this great panel that we have today of experts, folks that we have who are thought leaders, folks who are very experienced in their own right. And I know you guys have the bios in your packet, but again, I'm looking forward to having this conversation. So I want to, one, ask you to introduce yourselves, and I'm going to turn to my left to Eyal, if I can get you to introduce yourself, and then share a brief headline and perspective of how you think about your work and the intersection of diversity and inclusion in your field.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eyal Darman. I lead Accenture's data and AI practice. We have about 500 plus practitioners that support public service organizations, higher education, and nonprofits in the implementation of data and AI projects. So both CalPERS and CalSTRS are organizations that we count as our customers, and we've been helping both of them in those implementations that each of them have pursued. When I think of the intersection of AI and the space of DEI, I think of responsible use and making sure that as we implement these solutions, we have the appropriate guardrails in place in order to, on a regular and continuous basis, review the outputs, verify quality, minimize any risks and challenges that this technology inherently has. And so I think it's important and critical for all of us to think about responsible usage in any implementation that we do.
Dr. Sophia?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sophia Noble. I'm the David O. Sears Presidential Endowed Chair of Social Science at UCLA. I have to tell you that full title because there are not that many women who get to be endowed chairs in academia, so I feel very proud of that. Thank you. When I think about the opportunities and risks at the intersection of AI and equity, broadly, diversity, other kinds of ways of thinking about inclusion, I actually see it as much more of a risk than an opportunity. And I probably was invited here to be the person who's talking about those risks. About 15 years ago, I started work looking at search engines, large-scale search engines, which of course we know are fundamentally the architecture of generative AI and other types of large language model systems that we're dealing with today. And I, through a variety of studies and a book that is entitled Algorithms of Oppression, showed the ways in which search technologies are incredibly not just biased, but full of gross stereotyping, misinformation, factually inaccurate kinds of ideas that are incredibly harmful to individuals, to people, and more broadly to society.
And those themes in that work from more than a decade ago are still present in today's mass adoption of different kinds of AI technologies. And those range from everything from the lack of representation in Silicon Valley and the kinds of people who work in software engineering and hardware, all the way through the kind of global supply chain of workers that it takes to create these technologies that we kind of, in a very narrow band in the United States of middle-class people, use and think are incredible, maybe, but are so reliant upon environmental degradation, worker exploitation, and are, in fact, quite risky, in fact, is the way I would characterize them. Certainly, I see in the public use of these kinds of systems many of the stakes. So I'm here. Those are kinds of the things that I am working on. I lead a large data science institute. I co-lead that at UCLA, where we look at everything from kind of the fundamental theoretical uses of data and data science and data theory, all the way through to creative and innovative uses of data, but also the harms that can befall society and people from the use of these technologies and trying to think through those complexities.
Thank you.
And hi, I'm Sudar Yao. Physically, I am not positioned in the center, but perhaps I am between the opportunities and the risk that are already being represented here on this panel. I'm a financier and an investor like yourselves, former investment banker. I've been on both the buy and the sell side and across pretty much every asset class. And about 5 years ago, after leaving impact investing, where I worked for a very large $200 million donor-advised fund nonprofit, I decided to start focusing on responsible investing advisory in the asset class of venture capital. I was fairly early at that stage around identifying that this was an asset class without a lot of accountability. And I'm going to draw a pretty bright line between the lack of that diversity and accountability into the administration that we have today. So I think we've heard earlier that about 2% of VC AUM is decided upon by women, less than 50 basis points by Black investors. Those numbers have not improved since George Floyd's tragic murder. They have actually gotten worse in some cases. And I would also like to highlight that there have been a number of very noteworthy VC funds who have highlighted their lack of enthusiasm for Black communities and for women, and have actually been quoted as saying things along the lines of, "A real Black view, average Black culture needs to step it up and stop having as many kids born out of wedlock, parentheses, statistical indicator of underperformance, end parentheses, who don't value education or spend as much time on homework." This is a VC GP who has pension LPs. That's how he feels about Black communities. And then another very noteworthy venture capitalist who said, in a public setting, to the question, who do I pattern recognize to? How do I decide who I want to give capital to? Who's going to be my next hot founder? He said, "The founders of all the good ones, they all seem to be white, male nerds who have dropped out of Harvard or Stanford, and they have absolutely no social life." So there are a number of other quotes that I've chosen for reasons of dignity not to share with this audience, but the line that I will draw is exactly what we heard from Jennifer Siebel-Newsom, which is that if you have an asset class that has basically been anointed as the part of our capital markets that gets to decide what innovation looks like, you're going to get decacorn trends like the gig economy, like crypto, like AI. And yes, there are good trades, and there are going to be amazing opportunities from those things, but you're also going to get the destruction of labor rights, knowing where your customer comes from, things like child safety, and certainly intellectual property. So the perspective that I have is that each of us here, as an investor, needs to think very carefully about what we want in terms of the quote-unquote common good that the CEO of CalPERS just highlighted, and actually decide whether or not this asset class of venture capital is actually aligned with that, because this is the asset class that's actually deciding the future of AI in our society.
Great. Okay, Sudar, tell us how you feel.
Well said.
Yes, okay. So, opportunities
risk. I think we started to go down the risk and shifting to thinking about the untapped. I'm glad you talked about the panel prior, because I do think as we look at what's on the table, as we like to call it, in terms of we all have biases, we do have things that we, which can be dangerous, which also can cost folks dollars or leave things that we consider untapped, or for the last panel talking about women. And I do think those are huge opportunities as we are fiduciaries and folks who look at getting to the best outcomes. If we can speak a bit more, not only about the risk, but the opportunities. And then also, Sudhar, I'm going to bring back to you a little bit to talk about laws and policies that you think would be helpful in that perspective. So I'm going to shift to Dr. Sophia, and then we're going to go back and talk a little bit more about the laws and the policies.
Well, it's interesting when you think about opportunity, because I think that the way that opportunity generally gets characterized is kind of a profit at all cost, no matter who pays the price, or the costs of an opportunity are so obfuscated that people really have no idea what the stakes are around those kind of upside profits. So those are things that are worth thinking about, because those stakes are in fact already coming to visibility. So for example, we have a radical shift happening in politics in the United States and other Western liberal democracies around the world. That's been an opportunity for some, but I would say that it's actually cost us things like the notions of democracy. It has cost us a shrinking of the middle class. It has cost us increased global inequality. And that is a hard and difficult for people to understand straight line or connection that runs, let's say, from the tech sector to these kinds of costs in society. So to me, I think about this, when I think about my own pension, my own, like as a state worker, and what my own future is predicated upon financially, that it is tied to these kinds of, we know for in fact near enslaved labor and incredible violence in places like the Congo that are where we have mineral wars and mineral economies, mineral diplomacy that's kind of fundamentally driving those parts of the world. I was actually just in fact on a human rights panel at UCLA with the human rights leaders from around the world. And when you hear the stories that are coming out of places like that, or you talk to people who are working in the Philippines or in Brazil or in places, in fact, so many people don't understand that the global workforce that is actually deeply implicated in things like AI, your robot that's delivering your lunch 2 blocks from the restaurant to your office is actually somebody in a call center environment who's actually staffing that for barely livable wages. I mean, that's AI. That's not AI, okay? That's actually something else under a veneer of a marketing label. And so I think these are the things that are really important, because if we're going to talk about an opportunity, then the question is, are we talking about the stakes for what seems like a very small payoff if at the end of the day you wipe out so many people's opportunities that they can participate in society? And that includes the US workforce. We know that some of these technologies will in fact shrink the US middle class or white collar workforce. We see the impact on education. I mean, obviously we have a lot of pressure in the education sector to adopt these new technologies. I was just at UC San Diego at the med school, and I told the joke, I said, well, I'm personally worried about med school students going to medical school on ChatGPT, and so, everybody better eat their vegetables. And even the doctors in medical schools are worried about training a future of experts that need deep expertise and what will be obliterated because of the kind of market opportunity that there is to sell these technologies into the education sector. But it costs us something. Yeah. And I don't think we've seen the bill It hasn't fully come due, although it is coming due. And so I think it's important to put the opportunities in that kind of attention rather than just like, short-term gains for kind of longer-term downturns, which I think is actually what we're poised to see.
Yeah, and I think as we talk about either the implicit or explicit, I think biases that you were speaking to, there's one thing to have an unconscious bias and overlook investment opportunities. I think is we're talking to this group versus being very, kind of implicit or explicit about it. What were you think in terms of laws, policies, or things that we should think about regulatory to practices to consider? So whether it's those things or just thinking about AI in general, because I do think it's about opportunities that's more, that's much more connected. It's about talent. It is about our responsibility, but also about society as well.
It's such a great question right now where we're seeing the courts basically push back upon a presidency that is very much outstepping beyond what has been acceptable. I'll get to the answer to the question around regulation and legislation in a moment, but to this point around opportunity being equal, I wanted to highlight, and I promise it's my last one, a quote from a very prominent GP after the FTX crisis. So, quote, "I have been reflecting personally on the whole FTX fiasco, and it has taught me one more time that we should never invest because of FOMO, and we should 100% understand what we are investing in. I totally failed here on both." How is it possible that women and people of color are having such a hard time raising funds for their first emerging funds with a track record, and you have here a GP who is admitting on Twitter that they didn't do their diligence? And to your question around what are the checks and balances, what I saw both with that case and more recently is a number of litigation situations where LPs, whether or not they were on the LPAC, saying, "What do you mean you didn't understand how it worked? What do you mean you wrote on someone else's diligence? Show me the investment memo. How did you mark this to that point, quarter after quarter?" And so we're beginning to see LPs in a lot of ways realizing how much power they ceded over to the same white, cis, male GPs who were not delivering DPI, who were not delivering TVPI. And what I worry about, back to this point of, am I the middle ground between risk and opportunities, is are people going to pull back from venture writ large, or are they just going to pull back from the mega funds that have underperformed and actually allocate to the emerging managers that are actually out there hustling and finding businesses that are solving real problems and not effectively creating large fintech Ponzi schemes?
Yeah, can I just add to that? Yes, please clap for Sudhar. Everyone in this room should be asking Sudhar for her advice and counsel. I would add that there is a layer for scholars, a number of us, it has really been women of color, LGBTQ people who have been out front for nearly 20 years talking about the risks associated with a number of different kinds of technologies. And we are all funded just enough to kind of talk about that risk. But again and again and again, there is not enough resource for pro-social tech and other kinds of tech that is not that risky and has tremendous opportunity for upside. And I think one of the things that I really appreciate, how much I don't appreciate those quotes, is the fact that we have people who are much closer to evaluating great opportunity and what's on the horizon, who are completely sequestered away and not allowed to participate in advising. And I think that, again, provides an incredible risk. I think about a number of moments in history when people have had a narrative that, our country couldn't expand without this particular type of economy. There was nothing but unlimited opportunity. And those narratives that are so powerful in the US have also been tied to slave economies, to deep exploitation, child labor. So we are in a moment like those moments, in fact, and I'm not sure that people fully can appreciate that we're in a moment where we could ask very important, close examining questions that would have huge impact in the way that we look back and say we didn't participate in the race to the bottom around environment and labor, but in fact, we chose a different path.
So I think we've started this question, let's go back to the talent piece, right? And regardless of what AI or what technology you're using, it comes back to the people who are either running the talent or running the technology, or who are coding it or giving it the information or training it, if you will, about the technical term. Eyal, I'm going to get you in here to talk.
I don't know
if I
want to get into
get you in to talk a bit around how do we leverage either, or share an example of how AI has helped in terms of getting more folks who think about inclusive talent attraction or sourcing, so you can have folks who are making better decisions within your organization.
I think the example I would share with you is how Accenture sources our talent. And the way we think of how we source our talent is to leverage these tools to actually broaden the aperture of candidates to bring into Accenture. We have 800,000 people worldwide that work at Accenture, and they work in a variety of fields and a variety of roles globally across over 100 countries. For us, it's important to think about how we can actually leverage these AI tools. And what we've done with our HR department is actually implement AI onto ourselves by looking at how we are sourcing our talent and how we can actually use these capabilities to bring more people into the mix within Accenture versus narrowing it from maybe what would be, I'm going to call it human bias, because you're used to hiring the same people over and over again. And I think AI actually gives you an opportunity to change that by looking at diverse backgrounds and looking at other elements that would actually create a more richer ecosystem of employees within your organization. And so what we've done at Accenture is essentially just that. And then the result of it is that we maybe traditionally used to hire from just four-year institutions. And even that would be just a selective amount of those four institutions. And today, we don't do that. Today, that's just one channel of resources that we hire in, specifically in the US. But we have more apprentices. We have more interns that come through our mix. We have people that this is a second career to them, that they have something in their background that itching that innovation curiosity that we seek at Accenture. And as a result, we've been able to actually create a different workforce than maybe my father's Accenture versus the Accenture of today. And it's a very diverse group of people, and our financial outcomes have yielded have been a benefit of that diverse group of people that work at Accenture today.
So let's talk a bit about that, because I think we all are using AI tools one way or another. I mean, myself, I use them in different ways, and I've learned just as I'm using them, different ways to use them internally at work. At home, I have 2 college students who I'm telling them, learn it now. I don't care if you're not an expert, you just need to understand the tools that are out there. And that's something that I know at my organization, Franklin Templeton, we put a lot of effort and investment into these tools. Whether people adopt them or not, I know that's a different thing that Eyal, you and I were speaking to. It's a different thing around change management and getting folks to adopt the tools and actually use them, so that's another path. But there's also around, as you continue to do these things, how do you make the tools work for you in a way that you're making sure that you have oversight, you have safeguards in place. And I'm going to turn to Dr. Sophia, and then I'm going to give you a chance to jump back in here around what's essential that we don't start to use those tools and replicate any things of the past, whether it's in hiring biases or ways that we think about investing.
Well, one of the things that I think's challenging, and I will say that the week that ChatGPT came out, my colleagues and I, we immediately tested them, and we found, for example, asking ChatGPT to write a syllabi for us for classes we were teaching, we were able to immediately see all of the manufactured completely fake citations that were not real, that didn't exist, or combinations of two different colleagues' names together to make a new person, real journals but fake articles, which was sometimes funny because we knew those two people were nemesis in the field. So, there were things that were so interesting. And of course, we have PhDs and we're leading scholars in our fields. So we were able to immediately recognize how fraudulent this output was coming out of a large language model. Our students cannot discern that because they don't have that level of expertise yet. So I think this is incredibly important. I will tell you that at every college and university, there's a lot of pressure around these kinds of systems, either to adopt or not to adopt. And they are, over time, I can tell you, just watching from the time before students had laptops, even in the classroom, all the way through to this moment of ChatGPT, that students are not becoming stronger and stronger critical thinkers with these technologies. They are actually, in fact, under a lot of pressure to figure out what their own voice is, what their own thoughts are, and these only complicate their ability to develop those skills, that skill set. And of course, these are the future employees for every company and organization in the future too. So ceding so much space to these kinds of technologies, LLMs in particular, I think is incredibly dangerous because we know a lot of the output from these systems, more than half, is typically factually incorrect. And again, it is very difficult for you to know. Now, just like with a search engine, if you're asking something fairly banal, is Starbucks down in the lobby still open? You're probably going to get a reasonably accurate answer. But if you start asking it other kinds of questions, like where's the nearest latte in the vicinity, it's actually going to send you to Starbucks and not to the local small business first. It's going to send you to larger companies and corporations. So there's that type of bias in terms of the advertisers who underpin the data that these systems have been trained on and how their interests are always, as ad tech, I mean, all of these are various types of ad tech, are always kind of generated toward that. And they also are going to be deeply fraught with racist bias, sexism, other kinds of prioritizations around political perspectives that are, again, almost impossible with an anthropomorphized kind of interface that people are using today with LLMs. So I find this to be incredibly important. Even doctors right now are doing studies, and they're showing how using LLMs, for example, as diagnostic tools are incredibly fraught and are not catching the kinds of diagnoses and are misdiagnosing upwards of 80% of the time. So these things are not inconsequential. And when you think about the people who, not only as you mentioned, copyright and intellectual property, not only that all of my scholarship and work has been stolen to train these models without remuneration, and as is everybody else's, and that evidence-based research, for example, is trained alongside a subreddit, like an equal kind of proposition, is shocking to me. But you also have this invisible labor force of people who clean the data, many who are in Kenya, the Philippines, India, other parts of the world, making adjudication and decisions deeply away from the context or the site of where that knowledge emanates, as well as just the incredible environmental cost. I can't underscore that enough.
No.
The latest research shows that every single ChatGPT prompt that you enter or large language model prompt that you enter is the equivalent of pouring 8 glasses of water just on the ground. One prompt. So the question again is that going to be worth it over time? Do we really think it's worth it? We live in such a narrow bubble as middle class and more kinds of people and decision makers, let's say white collar workers, who are increasingly having these kinds of technologies encouraged. But I think there's a much bigger picture, and that again, I think is, we are in a bias, in fact, a bias of Silicon Valley toward these products without even understanding the broader implications.
I love what you're saying, and I just want to add a dimension by taking it a step up. There was this moment, right, I think we all remember it, when we started using the internet as consumers, and it wasn't clearly articulated to us at the time that we were effectively the product, right? That our data was what we were giving away in order to have free email, calendar, et cetera, et cetera. But if you play that to its natural conclusion now, what you have is an entire part of our capital markets that has just done a way better job than everyone else, including hedge, on internalizing the value and externalizing the cost to society, right? And so you have this asset class that has managed to figure out its liquidity problem by fundraising from Saudi Arabia, from sanctioned Russian oligarchs. And taking this capital in, have deployed it by and large to, in many cases, AI technologies that again erode digital rights, like intellectual property, the right of a child to exist safely on the internet without being groomed by either a chatbot or an active human pedophile, and you have the wide expansion of surveillance and defense technology. And this technology being deployed both in the United States as well as abroad to target dissidents. This is probably the best shell game that anyone in capitalism has ever played, and they now have the presidency. That's what we're talking about here. We cannot talk about AI without talking about where the data comes from, how it exists on all of you, how it can be used as you cross borders, and frankly, what that means in terms of your beneficiaries. And so for those of you who are fiduciaries, I would think very dispassionately and very passionately about what your real goals are, right? Have your conversation with your investment committee, stare at the black and white of your investment policy statement, but also talk to your rabbi and talk to your bishops and talk to your spiritual leaders, because there is going to be a moment in time coming very quickly for the capital markets in very much the same way that we saw the big law firms having to take sides and then the courts agreeing with Perkins Coie, where certain kinds of capital are frankly more explicitly recognized as unethical. And not only is it unethical, but you're also not going to find alpha, because the strategic litigation is going to come. Thomson Reuters does have value for their media and for their assets. People are starting to get upset that their children are being predated upon. And so the long tail, I think, of cost to large corporates and asset managers who don't pay attention to these trends is going to be significant.
And I think we're at a point, like you said, where the internet was years ago is where we're beginning, where AI is, to my understanding, and where it's beyond that, right? I think it's going there, and it's getting increasingly going to be a part of our lives. And I think for us, and I can only speak for my understanding of it, of how can we do it socially, because as I continue to hear, it's not going away. And I think we have to understand how can we do what we need to do as, responsible, either folks who utilize the information, or what can we do in our seats as professionals. And that's something that I constantly think about. And I made a comment earlier of how you have to, I personally use it and challenge it myself, and you have to have that critical thinking as a user, because you can't take it, the first answer, and say, well, this is what it means, because it does have folks who have created these things may or may have bias built into them. So I got into the habit of actually putting in questions in multiple chat systems and getting much better at asking the questions. And I even tell my team, you have to use it as a it's not a system that you get the first answer and that's the correct one. You have to challenge it at times.
I mean, when I use it is I always ask it to explain how it derived the answer. Because what you were saying earlier makes sense, right? If it's giving incorrect answers, if it's merging people's names and it's creating data sources that don't exist, then it's inaccurate and people won't use it. So I think the models have improved, but I think there's still an inherent nature in humanity to confirm, trust but verify the output. And so I typically, when I am doing research, I ask it to give me the sources and to cite any information that it provides me in order to help me pressure test the answers that it provides. But there's other ways and other things that I think will need to continuously be improved and enhanced for this to become part of the fabric of everyone in this room and the work that each and every one of us does. To me, and kind of, Regina, like you mentioned, the cat to me is out of the bag. So the question is how do we set it up, structure it, put it in place so that it actually is helpful and you minimize some of these essentially net new risks and challenges that this technology created.
Yeah, I don't know if the cat is out of the bag because the trade-off and the costs, and I think about this especially in terms of education. I've asked my students for many years, if you've got the internet and you can ask any question and get any answer, why are you going to UCLA? Why are you going to college? It's a legitimate question because there are other things besides just punching in questions into a computer that drive the way we build society and the way we do human relationships and build institutions and make community. And so what we have, though, for example, here in California, we have a sector that, for the most part, doesn't pay taxes, the tech sector. It offshores its profits, and it effectively defunds education in this state. It has massively defunded the UC, the CSU, and the community colleges, and of course, public education. So there's a relationship there when people don't have opportunity to get an education, and the expectation is that the rest of their lives, they're just gonna punch in something into their smartphone, and that's somehow making society. So I don't buy it that it's a fait accompli. I actually think we're at a really important moment where we should be thinking about the distribution of assets and resources in our communities. We used to have the most world-class system, educational system in beyond any other country in our three-tiered system of education. And now we have all three of those systems, probably within 2 years, are facing collapse because of exactly what you just talked about. The way in which other institutions have been captured by the tech sector and exploited, and there's actually no commitment to the public being educated or the public having health care or all of the other things that actually make it possible, let's say, for you to pay into a pension. I'm just gonna throw those things out and say they might be kind of connected. And so this is what I mean about it. It's like we actually have the ability to have a very sophisticated analysis rather than just believing in the hype that AI is here. It is not omnipotent. I don't know, some of you in here used 8 tracks. They're not still here either. I don't know. So, where's the CD? We have to, again, remember that we have so much more agency than we think we do. And we need to be thinking about this I think, in these complex ways.
I love that. And I'm if I may tie a few threads together, what I loved about the example of Accenture's successful AI, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm making some assumptions here. It is a small language model of data that you own. It has been audited. It has been back tested to make sure that there are no new or existing forms of unconscious bias in there, right? That is not the case.
And being tested on a regular basis.
Yeah, and that's not the case for most LLMs, right? And that's what I found so fascinating in a conversation I had with a very, very large VCGP that's about to establish its own fund focused on education and technology specifically for teaching. He's like, I want to put teachers out of business. If you can't do, you teach. These people in the profession is silly.
How do you really feel about that?
I know. My cortisol is spiking so much on this panel right now because it's true.
And I was aghast.
It is.
I was aghast, and as I was leaving this GP's office, their head of IR asked me whether or not I knew anyone at CalSTRS, because they saw my name at this conference. And I was like, I'm not sure that I could in good conscience introduce you to an investor decision maker at CalSTRS because we all know that in hindsight, all of the large labor unions like SEIU, like AFL-CIO, were quite regretful that they were indirectly invested in the GPs that funded Uber, which had an illegal business model for the longest time, and that et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We know where the gig economy went from there, right?
Think of the Accenture example, but then think of it in the education space. So I sat on a panel maybe a month or two ago with a company from, I think they're called Magic AI. And they help teachers.
I don't even know how you feel about the name. Is it magic, y'all?
It's not a naming contest. But they have a tool, essentially, that helps teachers. And my mom is an ex-teacher. She was a teacher for 30 years. And I sat with her and I said, if you had this ability to improve the way you're teaching your students, you have a large classroom, it's 30 plus kids, would this tool not fundamentally change how you teach? Because you're still human, you're still teaching kids, there's still some fundamental activities in the classroom. But is it a tool in your toolbox? Just like email is a tool in my toolbox. Just like
I'm going to argue that everyone hates email, though. So I stand on that.
But think of all the various technology tools that we use today, right? Because we use them all the time, whether it's email or the internet or other things. And to me, this is just another tool.
Okay, listen. My brother and sister were both K through 12 teachers. One was an elementary school teacher for 40 years. My brother was a high school teacher for 40 years plus. And I'm going to tell you that what they needed, my sister needed to not have to buy all her own school supplies out of her own pocket for her elementary school kids to be able to educate them. And she needed to make more than $40,000 a year and live in California. What teachers need is not more AI and gadgetry. What they need are livable wages and total funding into a system that actually would reduce class size and give them more opportunity, because everything we know about learning is that learning is iterative and it is actually a human experience. And that is something that an AI cannot do. It shouldn't replace your mom. And I'm not saying—
But it's not meant to.
I'm not saying that it will, unless these folks meet CalSTRS, which we don't want to happen. But I am saying that if we're talking about the deployment of resources into our educational system, what we have is a massive grift. The education sector has been a place to sell the wares, while on one hand, you don't pay taxes into the system and you defund education. And then you come around and say, we have the thing that's going to help you because it's so hard. Well, that's just a perfect, as you say, Ponzi scheme. These are the perfect conditions, manufacturing the crisis for the conditions of selling products in. And I actually think that these systems make it harder. I will tell you that last quarter, teaching incoming freshmen at UCLA and just trying to get them to set the device down, get out a pen and a notebook, and listen and be in a conversation for an hour and 15 minutes was absolutely almost impossible. Yeah. Because they are being neurologically rewired around the constant screen engagement to the point of almost feeling anxiety to just sit and listen and be in the presence of other people.
And to be clear, this is not
before AI.
I don't think that's an AI outcome.
No, hold on. No, it
but it's a technology outcome.
And that's a huge and very, very important taxonomical difference, right? There is a difference between generative AI and AI. We have here the author of Algorithms of Oppression.
Absolutely.
Search is artificial intelligence. It absolutely is. It may not be generative until the most recent time, right? Yeah. The point that I think is really critical to understand here is this is an asset class that has been less than 1.5% of most universal asset owners' portfolio. And it is now putting everything at risk. You want to talk about stable economic growth? Well, where the hell is the US default rate looking for those of you who have been focused on treasuries next month, right? We have here a number of leaders whose interests do not align with everyone else's because they're not banking on fiat currency existing. Once you start to think about things from a crypto Silicon Valley perspective, this entire conversation on the opportunities of AI sounds very quaint and very silly.
Yep. Naive, at least.
But there's drinks soon.
Yes.
They put us last because you do need the bar after this. panel. We are aware.
So we have time for, I'm getting for a couple questions to answer, and then we have to wrap up. So where do we want to go? I think we've touched on talent a little bit, some efficiency, maybe in folks' roles, because I am one who doesn't believe that it'll take away everyone's role. Well, personally, I think people need to learn how to leverage it. I do think there can be some positive efficiencies overall. And I do think in terms of what we do in the venture capital space, if I can get some folks to talk, I think you already touched on it a bit, on how do we make sure, how can we leverage it to find growth in areas that maybe we have overlooked as human beings, as we start to think through some of our, again, venture capital investment. If I could just get you all to speak a bit around the growth piece and be able to leverage the tools for what we do every day in our roles.
Well, I'll jump in first because I'm not necessarily a pro tool, obviously, I've established that. I will say, though, that, and just hearkening back to the panel before us, you know, I write in my work that it was in the 1960s. It was right around the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, where you had the first opportunity for women and people of color to participate in decision-making in institutions, in organizations, in companies. And in that moment in history, while you have this opening for participation, you have the rise of an idea that computers can make better decisions than people. And you effectively sequester decision-making back into and concentrate it into the hands of a few people who will set the terms of both the computing hardware, software, and the industry. And then those systems now are deployed kind of universally, globally, black boxed, lots of discriminatory ideas baked into how these systems work that are not easy to see, and we can talk for a long time about that. I think that we want to always keep people foregrounded rather than tools. I mean, in my work, I really feel like that is the point. The tools are going to have incredible limits. We can already look at the way that capital is deployed, and we don't need a tool to tell us that it's deployed in discriminatory ways, or let's say that people are precluded. You just don't need an AI tool to tell you that women and people of color are not part of the decision-making process. You also don't need an AI tool to see where the risks are, because you can pick up the newspaper and you can see the headlines about the risks and about the harm every week, every month. So I think that, you know, my message would be that we keep people and we keep this knowledge to the forefront, foreground it before the tools. Yes, there are certainly cases where small deployments of AI, decentralized AI, not environmentally intensive AI could reveal insights. But I don't think that is what the norm is right now.
And I'm going to have to get you guys to say a quick takeaway too in your last, because we're getting down to the last couple of minutes here.
I'll actually answer the last question in my takeaway. I do think there are amazing opportunities. And I don't think it's around productivity, right? And I don't think it's around hiring. And in fact, I think that we have heard pretty compellingly that if you're using AI with a large language model where you didn't pay for the data, you're probably just going to see the replication of the same hateful, discriminatory stuff that exists 20 scrolls down on Reddit, because that's what it's trained off of. But I've been really impressed by a number of my health and biotech BC-focused clients that have been thinking about smaller models, where minority groups are actually part of the data set, right? And here I'm thinking about the way in which women were not part of FDA trials until 1993, oh my goodness. And I do believe that there's a lot of potential, right? When you think about how we were all talking about CRISPR 8 years ago and then we all forgot about it, hey, what happened to my cure for cancer, right? And so there's going to be a number of new technology companies and a number of VC funds and hopefully LPs that back spaces like that, where it's a very specific application of AI, and not only is the intellectual properties ownership very much the right interpretation of fair use in a modern way, but the use of it is about a human need, not about corporate greed. And it rhymes.
I like that.
I didn't mean
Yeah,
to. Yeah.
I'm going to stay with the glass half full perspective on the topic. I think AI is going to help us do some things that we haven't been able to do before. You talked about healthcare, about cures for diseases. I think it's going to help us accelerate those types of capabilities. It's also going to change the way we do things. Our brains are not wired for the potential of AI, because most implementations today struggle with the change management aspect. We mentioned this a little bit earlier. And I think what we'll find out is that we need to really think differently about how we do work. You know, we did some research at Accenture that said 40% of the work today that people do across all industries, across all job categories, are going to be impacted with this technology. And that's a big change to how we do things. In our day-to-day work lives, think of 40% of your day is going to be impacted by this technology. And the question is how do we approach it in a responsible way? How do we approach it in a way where we're able to get some benefits and minimize a lot of the risks that we've talked about today, whether it's environmental risk or whether it's risks to how people learn and how people do things? I think it's important for us to be conscious of those risks and regularly look to mitigate them.
And I would just add on, and if I can step in this from where I sit in an organization and think about people and how this plays out practically, I would just say from thinking about the folks, especially women in your organization, who typically takes on a lot of your administrative type roles in the organization, I'm just saying from a percentage wise, some of these tools can help take that administrative burden off of their plates at times if you can get them to be able to leverage some of those tools and just make sure everyone has access to them. Sometimes when they're opened up in the organization, it's not always distributed to everyone and everyone's not taking advantage of it, but also being able to use it. That's why, asking the questions in those, how do we leverage it responsibly? How do we think about it in a way that it opens up capacity for everyone and not just a few who know what tools are out there and which ones to leverage and to use? Because in some cases, I know there are some decisions to be made, but in some organizations, they're there, but not everyone has access to those tools. And how do you leverage them and how do you use them? And then once you do use them, making sure that you don't take the first answer as fact and having that critical thinking to make sure that it is a thing that you leverage, and a person has to use it and still have that critical thinking. And because I do think it helps you throughout your day, and I'll just be very transparent in my day. There are certain groups that I don't call anymore because I don't need to leverage certain things, and productivity does go up, and it gives you the capacity to focus, I think, on different types of things. Not necessarily you don't have to, and I do want to learn and understand what that means, impacts down society-wise, but I do think it helps to shift different types of work and for us to think a little bit differently. And so I do think there's some efficiency gains as the organization moves forward, but we have to make sure everyone in the organization can move forward as we're all moving forward, so that equity inside your organization, I think, is really important, and for us to challenge it, because you do, as you ask those questions, you got to pause for a second, because some of the answers I've gotten back, you can't take it at face value. And the other quick, this is my little anecdote, even as you look at I love the research around the algorithms and how you can't, there is bias. And I told you, I researched, I did a lot of Googling this weekend after looking at your videos and your book. And it was, I do this, and if you do social media, I would encourage you to follow extreme folks on whatever end you do, or whatever social media. It's going to force your algorithms to give you different types of videos or people, whatever comes up. Because if you follow certain types of people or your thought process, you're going to continue to get fed that same type of information. But if you do polar opposites, when I start to get my feeds that come in, I'll see it's kind of strange at first. You'll get one viewpoint and then it'll be the opposite one view. But it's so helpful in trying to keep yourself balanced, because otherwise we all sit in our own echo chambers, if we want to admit it or not, and you continue to hear the same type of information. Before you know it, we're just sitting in that same information. So I try to challenge our leaders, and if you could walk away and just try to challenge yourself, because information is not, which I love, not always neutral, and continue to challenge yourself around people. There are people who touch all of this every day. So we have to make sure as we are all biased. We are all biased. I mean, that's human nature, that people are programming these systems. And I, think that, I don't know how we can change it, but these tools are here. And I continue to hear about Web 2.0, 3.0, and all these different tools, but we just have to figure out how do we do it and how do we do it responsibly. And that'll be my ending thoughts. And I think these folks will be around because we are in between here and...
We have an announcement also to make.
And we have an announcement, and I have someone who is going to come up and have a quick couple of words before we leave out, because there are refreshments here, but there is a quick
I think the announcement is that the bar is open.
All right, great.
No, but I think there was another question.
I think,
Thank you.
there we go.
As you head into the reception, we'd like to thank our generous sponsors for their contributions, including the National Conference for Public Employees Retirement Systems, for the drinks tonight. Attendees, you can pick up 2 drink tickets from any CalPERS team member at the bars. Please also help me thank the Association of Asian American Investment Managers, Naveen, Clear Lake Capital, Citizens Private Bank, and the National Association of Security Professionals, NorCal, for the delicious hors d'oeuvres. The general session room will remain open if you want to use the space to have conversations. Thank you again, and enjoy your time networking at the reception.
Like Dawson.